Hey everyone, this is Christopher Luxon, the former CEO of Air New Zealand.
This is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire.
This is Tracy Ibarra. I'm in Executive Solutions at Dell Technologies.
This is Travis Chappell, founder of Build Your Network. If you are wanting to learn how to embrace change,
To navigate through disruption as a leader,
then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast.
The Leadership is Changing podcast.
the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend,
my very good friend, Denis Giannoutsos.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsos.
Hey, welcome to the show, Leadership is Changing. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Leaders everywhere confront similar obstacles because people are people, but everywhere you go, leaders are overwhelmed, disrupted, and under pressure. They run from email to email, meeting to meeting. Many leaders are not changing quick enough, which means they run the risk of becoming irrelevant and being left behind. The purpose of the show is taking our listeners' leadership to another level by finding their balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. I believe we don't have enough effective leaders in the world today, and if we can get the leaders to step up and lead change, then they can inspire real change. Hey listeners, it's now time to adapt in our fast-moving world, and I want to welcome you to the Ask Denis episode, which is a freestyle episode. I'm asked a question by our listeners, where I share my thoughts, insights, and experiences from working with many leaders around the globe. Hey listeners, if you haven't already checked out the Facebook group or the LinkedIn page, Leadership is Changing, would love to see you there. Come along and join those community of individuals, of people who love sharing their thoughts and so forth around leading and change and a whole lot of other areas as well. So we look forward to seeing you in those different tribes, communities, and people who are just out there wanting to learn from each other, which is great. Hey listeners, I want to talk to you today about how to lead after a year of lockdowns. Wow, what a year it's been. For some countries, it's just been over a year. And it's been really quite interesting to see how it's all panned out. You know, I've worked with many leaders around the globe over the last year and talking to them, working with them, workshops, coaching, so forth. And it's really quite interesting to see where things are at. Of course, in this country where I come from, in New Zealand, we've been in lockdowns. We've had 4 over the 12 months, but we've been very fortunate as well, and life has sort of got on with things, and we haven't been restricted as much as other countries have, even though we are still living like we're in lockdown in certain parts of where we are. And it's been interesting to see because many countries have done certain things. Because if you think about it, it's just over 12 months ago, in March of last year, whereby many countries started to go into lockdown. There was a lot of shock by people. What's going on? And the unknown was really big for a lot of people. How long are we going to be in lockdowns for? I had people saying to me, you know what, I'm just going to wait for it to blow over. Well, they would have been waiting a long time. And you had people who were saying, this is unfamiliar territory. We've never been here before, and we don't know what to do. And so change was put onto us. It was forced onto us. It was something that we weren't actually expecting. We didn't want this pandemic, but it actually put immense pressure on a lot of people around the world, and a lot of people had to go through the change curve of the different stages within the change curve, and they were forced to do that. It was something that was out of our control, and a lot of people have tried to control it, but it's out of our control. But what is in our control is our attitude and the way we reacted to it, and number 2 was where we are going next. And the vaccine and other things around where we are going next, where people are working and how they're working and what they're doing in life is where we are going next. I took some time out to reflect on the last 12 months, and it's actually quite interesting because I see what's happened from talking to other people as well, that many have reflected on their life during the lockdowns. So the pandemics has actually forced people to think about life. It's actually forced them to think about their businesses, their teams and their people and their roles that they do today. It's quite interesting to see that some of them have quit their jobs already because they want to go and do things in life that they really want to go and do versus just being in a job. Many have gone off to quit their jobs to go and do something that they've been wanting to do for a while and been putting it off. Some started businesses. In fact, new ideas and new innovation tend to come from times like now when we are under pressure and we're having to look at things differently. Yes, there are a group of people who just froze. They paralyzed. They didn't know what to do, and they found it very hard. There were all sorts of things that were happening for all of us as we were going through. People were really scared. Each country handled the lockdowns or the lack of lockdowns differently. But how did the leaders fare during this time? What about organizations, businesses? How did they go as well? Well, if we look at the organizations and businesses, what we can see now is that some did adapt to what was going on. They had to look at what their businesses were. Some of them actually pivoted or adapted and started to do different things based on what the market needed. Some closed. Some went bankrupt. Some went out of business. Some couldn't do business without having people around. And then there were some businesses that just thrived. They just took off. They were doing massive turnovers and revenue and actually servicing a lot of customers and looking after them and providing them value for sure. But what I noticed is that within a lot of organizations and businesses, those organizations that did really well were because they actually had trust as a foundation already in their organization. Yes, there would have been different degrees or levels of trust within organizations, but those who had a foundation of trust that was really strong, they were the organizations that were able to adapt quickly and were able to move forward, which is really amazing. Those organizations that have stuck throughout the lockdown and kept on working and moving forward could be huge organizations going forward. But what about the leaders? What happened with them? What was going on? People were looking at their leaders as rocks, as that stability, as that support. Some of the leaders didn't even turn up. Now, what do I mean by that? Yes, there was a lack of leadership. They were dismissive. They didn't communicate very well with people. Some of them, as I said, didn't even turn up at all. Others stepped up, and what they were doing is they were brilliant. They were stepping up as leaders, and they were calm. They were in control. They had vision. They took action, and they were people focused. They really got around their people and rallied around them to help them and help them move through things. People are looking for a leader that's actually going to take them through times like now. People want to have a leader who's doing that. Then there was this other group which was fascinating to watch it happen. They were the people who were the non-leaders. Well, when I say non-leaders, what do I mean? They were people who didn't have titles, but they're the ones that showed massive leadership. They stood up, they shined. Really, they're our new leaders of the future. In other words, of now. And so what you'll notice, and what we're starting to see already, is that many CEOs, many business owners, many entrepreneurs are starting to review, are starting to reflect on things. Even though they've been reflecting and reviewing on things, they've been trying to stay alive as a business, but now they're starting to think a little bit more about the future. They're starting to think about, are they still in the right business today? Do they need to diversify? Do they need to look at buying another business to be able to diversify, or do they start a new line of business or a brand new business? They want to know whether they have the right organization structure to support that business or businesses. And if not, then they're going to need to adapt and move to actually have that happen. Problem happens, though, is that a lot of leaders come out and make announcements. They come out and they make these announcements, but they don't give enough information to people. And also when they come out and make these announcements, they don't always follow through. Many organizations talk about a big change coming through, but they don't actually do it for a year or 2 years, and people leave people there hanging, wondering what's going to happen, what will happen next. The other thing that some of these CEOs are going to be thinking about is, other than just are they in the right business, but also around the organizational structure, the other thing they're going to think about is, do we have the right leaders in the right roles? Because COVID has really emphasized or really made a pressure situation whereby it's actually asking people to step up. And those who didn't, will they really be our leaders going forward? And so a lot of these organizational leaders, the CEOs and so forth, are going to be looking at, do we have the right leaders in the right role? And this is why I'm starting to see a lot of organizations starting to think about change and leading that change. Others are starting to think about, how do we actually develop our leaders going forward? And others are thinking about, well, we need our leaders to be coached. We need them to have that support. We need to develop them now more in case we have other pandemics going forward. Team, people talk about a pandemic. I think we should be thinking about pandemics. I really hope I'm wrong. But, this may not be the only one. There may be other variants or other kind of pandemics that could actually happen. But so many lessons are being learnt right now. Some of the Asian countries have done very well in the sense that they learnt a lot from the bird flu scenario, whereby they went through that several years ago. And so they were able to adapt and move very quickly. So some big observations for me, which is really about how you can lead going forward, is really interesting. The big observations were, you needed to look after yourself. And if you aren't, you need to do that right now. Because if you think about my opening in this podcast, we talk about the purpose of the show is taking our listeners' leadership to another level by finding their balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. And it's the personal well-being that's really important, team. You need to look after yourself. Because as I've said before in other episodes, there is no sporting team, political party, other things in life that everyone agrees on 100%. Sporting teams, political parties, religions as an example. But there's one thing that all airlines around the world do agree on, and that is, in the unlikely event that your mask drops down in front of you, put your mask on first before you help anyone else. Now, the reason they say that is that because we need to be looking after ourselves before we can help anyone else. We can do that through sleep, getting enough sleep, getting good quality sleep, through exercise and other things. But the other big thing for me around that is around balance. Having that balance between doing the work life, the work side of things, and then back into your personal life, even though nowadays it seems to be a bit of a blur, is actually having that boundary and understanding those boundaries and then making sure that you're looking after yourself. The second thing here as an observation was being decisive. Making decisions deliberately and urgently. Were they perfect decisions? No. Did they need to be perfect? No, not always. A decision needed to be made. Did people actually adapt or tweak those decisions? Yes, they did at times, but at least they made a decision. People are wanting leaders around them that do make decisions. And the next biggest thing as an observation I saw was communication. Those who communicated on a regular basis with teams, whether it be on conference calls, whether it be through things like WhatsApp, anything like that, to stay in touch with people and stay connected was really important. So as we start to come out of lockdowns for some countries, vaccines are starting to be rolled out. People are starting to think about things. Many leaders are physically, emotionally, and mentally tired. It's been a big year for them. And so we need to get support around them so then they can help their people as well. We need them to lead change again, back in the workplace. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. We found it here in this country, coming from lockdown and getting back into offices and then back into lockdown, back into offices and back into lockdown. It was quite hard having that yo-yo scenario. But every time people were coming back into the lockdown, especially at the beginning, it was really quite hard for people to come back in. Yes, some organizations have got their hybrid model now whereby there might be 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, or 2 days in the office and 3 days at home. They have a bit of a hybrid model. The mindset is starting to change in relation to the pandemic. People are getting used to it, of course, getting used to lockdowns, getting used to working differently, living differently for sure. Personal well-being is going to be the biggest thing that you need to look after for all leaders. Exercise, eating well, drinking lots of water, sleep, and there's something else here I think a lot of leaders need to do. They need to have thinking time. They need to take time out to think about things, start being more strategic, start thinking about approaches, and then taking action around that as well, which is really important. I think, team, the big thing around here is this. If you can communicate with your teams and do it well, not just communicate, but actually connect with them well, that's important. If you can look after yourself and making sure that you're match fit to go out there onto the field or do whatever you need to do to lead your team, that's great. Remember, you're a role model. Remember, people are looking at you. So if you're doing those kind of things and talking about it, then they'll more likely get inspired and do the same thing as well. You know, I'm helping many leaders and organizations at the moment in relation to what I've just been sharing about how to lead after a lockdown. There is some skills and some things that people need to know and understand and things for them to focus on when they're coming back after lockdowns. If you or your organization need help around this, I'm more than happy to help out and help you through this and help you through your thinking. Leaders need to be decisive. They need to be making decisions a lot and being deliberate. People are wanting them to get on with it, wanting them to lead from the front, to lead the change, and that's what we definitely need. We need them to communicate really well. And so if your organization needs help in all those side of things, or help the leaders in their mindsets now to lift their game even more so, even though they've done so well over the last 12 months, especially in the lockdowns, what can we do now to help them move forward even more so? If there's an organization that has leaders who realize throughout the lockdowns that they don't want to be there as a leader anymore, well, then that's all good. But we need to move for them to move over so we can allow other leaders to come through. But here's the question for you. Who are those new leaders coming through? And what are you doing to help develop those leaders, to help them be the best that they can be, so then they can lead the organization and the people, help your customers, your stakeholders? How are you going to develop them? That's a big question for you. More than happy to help you. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. So it's really important that we do that. How to lead after a lockdown. Number 1, look after yourself. Number 2, make decisions and get on with it urgently. And number 3, communicate well and connect with your people. Hey, listeners, what we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Change is incredibly scary, especially with the unknown and the unfamiliar territory. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing. Hey, look out for the episodes as they're being released and download them, have a listen, put a review and a rating. Share them with your friends, your family, your network. If there's any feedback you'd like to give me on the show, or if there's any question you want me to ask my guests as I interview them, or if you have a question for Denis on the Ask Denis episode, feel free to send me an email, denis@leadingchangepartners.com. Listeners, if you haven't already checked out the Facebook and the LinkedIn group and page, Leadership is Changing, love to see you there. Until next time, thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.